I'm sorry, but we can't process this transaction." Eleanor Monroe looked up, her eyes darkening. Across the counter, Jason Whitmore, the branch manager, stood with his arms crossed, his expression cold and dismissive. "Excuse me? I've provided my ID, my account details. Everything is in order." Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. Jason let out a small, condescending chuckle, his gaze scanning her from head to toe. "To be honest, you don't exactly look like someone with an account of this size." The room fell silent. A few customers paused their transactions, stealing quick glances in her direction. Rachel, the teller, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, yet Eleanor could feel the judgment hanging in the air. People were whispering. They were questioning her, doubting her, maybe even mocking her. Eleanor's fingers curled into a fist. She had been in situations like this before, but this time she wasn't about to let it slide. She took a slow, steady breath and straightened her posture, locking eyes with Jason. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Her voice was low, steady, calm, yet unmistakably sharp. Situations like this happen far too often. Have you ever seen someone being treated unfairly? Stick around for today's story, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. The late afternoon sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows through the towering glass windows of Monroe Financial. Inside, the branch was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but cold, impersonal. Eleanor Ellie Monroe stepped inside, her sneakers making a soft tap against the polished marble floor. The automatic doors whispered shut behind her, sealing her inside the institution she had spent years building. She had walked into countless banks before, but this one felt different, detached, indifferent, lacking the warmth she had always envisioned for her company. Her company. Few people in this room knew that. No one noticed the woman in dark jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and a soft beige cardigan. No one recognized her chestnut brown hair, casually pulled back into a ponytail. No one looked twice at her. And that was exactly what she wanted. For years, Ellie had prided herself on building a financial institution that prioritized fairness, accessibility, and genuine service. She had poured her heart into this company, ensuring that Monroe Financial would be a place where every customer, regardless of wealth, status, or appearance, was treated with dignity. But today, she wasn't here as Eleanor Monroe, the CEO. Today, she was just another customer, and she was about to see whether her values were truly being upheld or whether some employees had forgotten what this bank stood for. Ellie moved toward the front counter, her eyes scanning the room with quiet observation. The design of the branch was sleek. White countertops, gold-trimmed signage, modern light fixtures casting a soft glow. But beneath the pristine aesthetic, something felt off. The energy was stagnant. Employees moved through the motions, lacking the warmth and attentiveness that should define customer service. She approached the main teller counter, where a young woman sat behind the protective glass divider. Rachel Carter. Her nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She had a professional enough appearance. Dark brown hair and a neat ponytail, crisp uniform, polished nails. But her posture told a different story. Rachel sat slouched slightly, her fingers tapping at her keyboard with little urgency. Her gaze remained glued to the screen in front of her, not once acknowledging Ellie's presence. Ellie waited. Nothing. She glanced at the clock. 4 seconds passed, then 5. Still, no greeting. Ellie cleared her throat. "Excuse me." Rachel's eyes flicked upward for half a second before she exhaled sharply. her fingers still clicking at the keyboard. "I'll be with you in a minute." Flat, bored, dismissive. Ellie's jaw tightened slightly, but she forced herself to remain neutral. She wasn't here to demand attention, but she was here to observe. Rachel finally turned toward her, though her expression barely shifted beyond mild impatience. "What do you need?" Not, "How can I help you today?" Not, "Welcome to Monroe Financial." Just that. Ellie studied her for a beat before replying, her tone smooth, calm. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." Rachel said nothing. Instead, she wordlessly grabbed a withdrawal slip from the side and slid it across the counter. No explanation. No confirmation of how much Ellie wanted to withdraw. Just a push of paper, like she was an inconvenience. Ellie picked up the pen and filled out the slip with deliberate precision. Name, Eleanor Monroe. Account number, 392-4671. Withdrawal amount, $5,000. She set the form back on the counter and slid it forward. Rachel picked it up, glancing at it with the same indifference, until she saw the amount. Then, something shifted. Her fingers stilled, her posture straightened, and for the first time, she truly looked at Ellie. Rachel's eyes darted down to the slip, then back up to Ellie's face. A flicker of hesitation crossed her features. Ellie could see the thought forming in her mind. It was subtle, so subtle that most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Ellie had seen this look before. The slight narrowing of the eyes, the micro-expression of doubt, the almost imperceptible tightening of the lips. Rachel wasn't just looking at a withdrawal form. She was making an assumption. And then Ellie watched it happen. Rachel's fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then they stopped. Instead of processing the transaction, she slid the form back across the counter. "I'll need to see ID." The words were standard. The tone was not. Ellie didn't react immediately. She knew bank protocol. A withdrawal of this amount often required identification. But this wasn't about policy, this was something else. Still, she kept her expression even, reaching into her bag and pulling out her driver's license. She placed it neatly on the counter. Rachel took it, but this time, she examined it for far too long. She tilted it toward the light, ran her thumb over the plastic surface as if checking for tampering. Then, without saying another word, she turned and disappeared behind the frosted glass door labeled Manager's Office. Ellie's patience remained steady. She wasn't angry, not yet. But she was paying attention, because she had been in enough rooms, had sat through enough meetings, had witnessed enough interactions to know when something was off. Rachel hadn't asked for ID because of standard protocol. She had asked for it because she didn't believe Ellie belonged here. Ellie took in a slow breath, letting the moment settle. She had come in expecting a simple transaction. Instead, they were about to make a very expensive mistake. Ellie stood at the counter, her fingers lightly drumming against the cool marble surface. She had seen this kind of treatment before, just never in her own bank. Behind the frosted glass door, Rachel Carter was speaking in hushed tones with someone Ellie couldn't see. It didn't take a genius to guess who it was. Jason Whitmore, branch manager. The man supposedly responsible for ensuring that customer service was efficient and professional. The seconds dragged. Ellie resisted the urge to glance at the time, instead observing the bank employees as they went about their business. Not a single one of them looked up at her. No reassuring glance, no acknowledgement. Just silence. That was the part that irritated her the most. Not just the hesitation, but the quiet dismissal. The silent way people made assumptions. She had seen this happen to others before, She just never expected it to happen to her. Finally, the frosted glass door swung open. A tall man stepped out, broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, with neatly combed dark hair and a crisp navy blue suit. Jason Whitmore had the kind of presence that demanded control, but not respect. And Ellie knew, within seconds of watching him walk toward her, that he already thought she was a problem. His expression was neutral, but too neutral. The kind that wasn't just professional, but deliberately cold. Rachel followed 2 steps behind him, her expression carefully blank. Jason stopped at the counter, picked up Ellie's ID, and examined it for far too long. Then, he did what she expected. He didn't look at her first. He looked at Rachel. "What's the issue?" he asked, as if Ellie weren't standing right there. Rachel hesitated, casting Ellie a quick glance before lowering her voice slightly. "She wants to withdraw $5,000. Jason's jaw flexed slightly, as if the amount were somehow personally offensive. Finally, he turned his attention to Ellie, and then it began. The interrogation. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Jason said, though there was nothing polite about his tone. "I understand you're making a withdrawal." Ellie gave a slow nod. "That's correct." Jason held up the form, tilting it slightly, as if inspecting it for hidden errors. $5,000, he repeated, his voice carrying a deliberate weight. Ellie kept her expression neutral. "That's right." Jason hummed. "That's a large amount of cash." Ellie didn't miss the way Rachel shifted slightly, as if sensing where this was going. "It's not that large," Ellie said simply. Jason exhaled sharply through his nose. "May I take another look at your ID?" Ellie had already given it once, but she reached forward and pushed it closer anyway. Jason picked it up, holding it against the light, studying it like a detective looking for a clue, as if she were some kind of fraud, as if she didn't belong here, as if he was searching for a reason to say no. "What do you do for work, Miss Monroe?" The question came so casually, but Ellie knew better. Her jaw tightened slightly, but her tone remained smooth. "I run a business." Jason nodded slowly. "What kind of business?" Ellie met his gaze evenly. "Finance." Jason tapped a finger against the counter. "Is this a personal account or a business account?" "It's a personal account," Ellie replied, exhaling quietly. "It says that right on the form." She could see where this was going. Jason wasn't just checking details. He wasn't following policy. He was stalling, and worse, he was testing her. The moment of disrespect. Jason glanced at Rachel before setting the ID down, and then he said it. "Is this really your account, Miss Monroe?" Ellie felt the shift in the air. Rachel went stiff beside him. The bank grew just a little quieter. Ellie could hear the sound of someone typing at a nearby desk, the distant murmur of a phone call, the ticking of the clock on the wall. But in this moment, none of it mattered, because this was it. The thing she had been waiting for. Not just hesitation, not just inefficiency, outright doubt, not based on facts, not based on anything logical, just assumption. Ellie's fingers curled slightly against the marble counter. Her first instinct was anger, not just for herself, but for every single person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in a place that should serve them. But anger wouldn't do her any good right now. Instead, she let the silence settle. She let Jason feel it. Then, slowly, deliberately, she tilted her head. "Would you ask me that if I looked different?" Jason's eyes flickered. Not much, but enough. Rachel inhaled sharply beside him but said nothing. Jason's face smoothed back into calculated neutrality. "Excuse me?" he said, voice cool. Ellie leaned slightly forward. "I asked if you would be questioning me like this if I looked different," she repeated. "If I were a man in a tailored suit. If I were older. If I looked more like—" She gestured toward the far end of the lobby, where a businessman in a high-end blazer was being helped without delay. "That guy." Jason's lips pressed into a thin line. "Miss Monroe, we take security very seriously. It's just a precaution." Ellie let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "A precaution?" she echoed. Jason straightened. "Yes, ma'am." Ellie exhaled slowly. "Then tell me something." Jason lifted his chin. "What?" "If this is just a precaution," Ellie said smoothly, "why aren't you asking him those same questions?" Jason followed her gaze toward the businessman across the lobby, the one withdrawing an amount far higher than hers, the one who had not been asked for additional verification. Jason's jaw flexed slightly. "I'm just following procedure." Ellie smiled, not a warm smile, a sharp, knowing one. "Are you?" Silence. A flicker of discomfort crossed Jason's face. Ellie held his gaze, her patience running thin. They were making a mistake. A very big mistake. But instead of calling it out, instead of ending this right here, right now, she decided to let them dig their own grave a little deeper. So she leaned back, crossed her arms loosely over her chest, and tilted her head. "Go ahead," she said, voice smooth. "Take all the time you need." Jason hesitated. Rachel looked at him nervously, and in that moment, Ellie knew. They were starting to realize who they were dealing with, but they still didn't know just how much trouble they were in. Ellie remained poised, her arms loosely crossed as she held Jason's gaze. She had been in this game long enough to recognize when someone was scrambling for control. Jason was floundering, trying to find a way to justify his baseless scrutiny, but she wasn't going to make it easy for him. Then, just as the tension in the air seemed to reach a breaking point, the sound of the glass doors swooshing open cut through the silence. A man stepped inside. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that fit like it was tailored specifically for him. A gold watch gleamed on his wrist, his leather shoes polished to a shine. Everything about him screamed money and power. But more importantly, he was immediately treated as such. Rachel straightened in her seat before the man even reached the counter. Jason, whose entire posture had been rigid with skepticism toward Ellie, suddenly adopted an entirely different demeanor. His expression smoothed, his stance shifted, and the hostility he had displayed just moments before vanished as if it had never existed. Rachel didn't slide a form across the counter to him. She didn't ask for an ID. She didn't even hesitate. "Good afternoon, Mr. Calloway," she greeted, her voice suddenly polished, professional. "Here for your usual transaction." Ellie didn't miss the way Rachel spoke his name with practiced familiarity. This wasn't his first time here. The man nodded curtly, barely acknowledging Rachel before glancing at Jason, who gave him a small, approving nod, a silent signal. Rachel moved fast. Too fast. She typed something into the system, and within seconds, she was reaching for the register. Ellie couldn't see the amount, but she could see that whatever transaction was being processed, it was happening without any of the scrutiny she had just been subjected to. Rachel handed over an envelope, thick, heavier than a standard withdrawal should be. Ellie's stomach tightened. It wasn't the withdrawal itself that set off alarms in her head. It was the way it was being done. No verification, no questions, no ID check. Just a smooth, effortless transaction while she was still being interrogated over $5,000. And then, she saw it. Rachel's hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. The moment Mr. Calloway turned away, her gaze flicked toward Jason, a quick, nervous glance. She looked worried. Ellie knew that look. It was the look of someone who knew they were part of something wrong but felt trapped. Ellie's instincts sharpened. She had walked into this branch expecting to test customer service, but now she was realizing there was something much bigger at play. Keeping her expression neutral, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. A simple, unassuming action. She tapped the screen and opened the Monroe Financial internal banking app. As CEO, she had access to every single transaction happening in real time, and just as she suspected, there it was. A flagged transaction, a withdrawal of $50,000, processed seconds ago. The account belonged to a corporate entity with no clear business description. Ellie's heart pounded, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Recognition. She had seen setups like this before. Shell accounts, companies on paper but not in reality. Money being moved in and out with no legitimate trail. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a flashing red light. She lifted her gaze, looking at Jason with new clarity. The hesitation, the stalling, the fact that he had treated her like an intruder while bending over backward for this man. Jason hadn't been trying to stop a fraudulent transaction. He had been trying to stop a witness. Ellie's pulse remained steady, but her mind was already working 5 steps ahead. Jason wasn't just a bad manager. He was complicit in something much bigger than customer discrimination. She had come here to test the integrity of her employees. Now she was about to tear down an entire operation. But first, she needed to let them believe they were still in control. So Ellie did what she did best. She waited. She let Jason think he had the upper hand, and when the moment was right, she was going to turn this entire situation on its head. Ellie's fingers tightened around her phone. The numbers on her screen didn't lie. The transaction had just been processed. $50,000 moved from a flagged account without question, without verification. Yet she was still standing here, being treated like a potential fraud. She lifted her gaze, fixing her eyes on Jason Whitmore, who was still holding her ID like it was some foreign object, something to be scrutinized, questioned, doubted. Rachel stood behind him, looking increasingly uneasy, her fingers twitching slightly on the counter. Mr. Calloway, the well-dressed businessman who had just walked out with an envelope thick with cash, had already disappeared through the glass doors. His transaction was completed before Ellie's had even been considered. The hypocrisy was glaring. The injustice was infuriating. But Ellie wasn't just angry. She was done playing. A slow, deliberate calm settled over her as she reached up and pressed the record button on her phone. Jason didn't notice at first, but Rachel did. Her eyes widened as Ellie lifted the device slightly, just enough for the camera to catch both Jason's face and the bank's sleek logo behind him. "I have a question," Ellie said, her voice even. Jason's gaze snapped to her, his brows furrowing. "Excuse me?" Ellie turned the screen slightly, making sure everything was being documented. "That man who just left, Mr. Calloway, I believe, his transaction was processed without question. No ID check, no verification. Meanwhile, I've been standing here for 20 minutes being treated like a suspect." Jason's expression faltered, just for a second. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he quickly smoothed it back into professional neutrality. "Ma'am, I already explained." Ellie cut him off. "No, you haven't." The bank grew quieter. Customers nearby started paying attention. "So I'll ask again. Why was his transaction approved instantly while mine was delayed?" Jason squared his shoulders, glancing around like he was searching for support. But Rachel wasn't stepping in. No one was. Ellie let the silence stretch. Let him feel the weight of it. Then she tilted her head slightly. "Would you like to explain what's going on with the system here, Mr. Whitmore?" Jason exhaled sharply, adjusting his tie, irritation flickering in his gaze. "Miss Monroe, if you don't lower your voice—" "Lower my voice?" Ellie let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "That's your response? Not an actual answer?" Jason's patience was slipping. His jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I suggest you leave if you're going to cause a disturbance." Ellie smiled, not a kind smile, a dangerous one. "I think I'll stay." Jason's hands twitched. He was trying to maintain control, but Ellie could see the cracks forming in his carefully crafted demeanor. Rachel shifted beside him, looking even more nervous. She knows, Ellie thought. She just doesn't know what to do about it. Ellie took a step closer, lowering her phone just slightly, and then she dropped the bombshell. "I'd like to introduce myself properly." Jason blinked. "What?" Ellie reached forward, plucking her ID from his fingers. Then, with deliberate care, she turned it over so that her full name and title were clearly visible. Then she set it down on the counter. "Eleanor Monroe," she said, her voice carrying through the lobby. "Founder and CEO of Monroe Financial." The room froze. Rachel inhaled sharply. A nearby customer let out a soft, audible gasp. A man standing at the teller's window turned his head sharply, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Jason just stared. His face drained of color so quickly Ellie almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You..." Jason's voice cracked slightly before he caught himself. He swallowed, regaining composure. "You're Eleanor Monroe?" Ellie arched a brow. "That's what the ID says, doesn't it?" Jason was spiraling. His entire demeanor shifted from authoritative skepticism to barely concealed panic. He opened his mouth, struggling to form words, but no coherent defense came out. Rachel, standing beside him, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Ellie exhaled slowly. "So, now that we have that established, let's talk about what just happened here." Jason finally snapped out of his shock. "Miss Monroe, I apologize for any misunderstanding. If you had just informed us of your position, this could have been handled much more smoothly." Ellie's eyes flashed. "So what you're saying is that I only deserve to be treated with respect if you know I'm the CEO." Jason's mouth opened, then shut. He had nothing. The silence in the room was deafening. Ellie turned slightly, addressing Rachel now. "Rachel, you processed Mr. Calloway's transaction without checking ID, correct?" Rachel's lips parted, her face pale. Ellie didn't need her answer. She already knew it. She turned back to Jason. "You questioned me, delayed me, and made it very clear that you didn't think I belonged here. But it's worse than that, isn't it?" Ellie's tone turned sharper, more cutting. "Because while you were stalling me, I found something else. A flagged transaction. A large withdrawal from an account with no clear business description." Jason stiffened. Rachel's breath hitched. "Now we're here." Ellie locked eyes with him. "This isn't about security, is it?" Jason's hands clenched into fists. He knew. She knew. And now everyone else did too. Ellie pulled out her phone again, but this time she wasn't recording. She was dialing. Jason watched in horror as she lifted the device to her ear. "What? What are you doing?" he stammered. Ellie held up a finger, signaling for silence. Then, after 2 rings, the call connected. "Diane? It's Ellie. I need you to put me through to the board immediately." Jason visibly swallowed. Rachel took a step back. Ellie's expression didn't change. "Yes, I'm at the downtown branch. No, there's no need to schedule a meeting. I want an immediate investigation launched into their recent transactions. And while you're at it, have security prepare a dismissal order for one Jason Whitmore." Jason made a choked sound. Ellie ignored him. "Yes," she continued smoothly. "Effective immediately." She ended the call and pocketed her phone. Then, finally, she looked Jason in the eye. "You should probably start packing your things." Jason was speechless. Rachel's face was ashen. The entire room buzzed with quiet shock. Ellie let the moment linger. Then, with a final glance around, she turned and walked out. She had come in to test the system. Instead, she had torn it down. And now, it was time to rebuild it the right way. The weight of silence lingered in the air long after Eleanor Monroe had walked out of the bank that day. The glass doors had barely shut behind her when reality crashed down on everyone inside. Jason Whitmore stood frozen at the counter, his mind still reeling from the revelation that the woman he had just humiliated wasn't just another customer. She was the CEO, the person who had built the very institution he worked for. Rachel Carter remained behind him, visibly shaken. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched the edge of the counter. Unlike Jason, she wasn't trying to come up with excuses. She knew what had happened, and she knew she had played a part in it. And the customers, they had witnessed it all. A murmur of voices started rippling through the bank as people whispered to one another, shocked, intrigued, and a little bit thrilled. It wasn't every day that you saw a CEO expose corruption right before your eyes. Then, the phone at the manager's desk rang. Rachel flinched at the sound. Jason hesitated before slowly reaching for it, as if grasping for some last shred of control. He picked up the receiver, pressing it to his ear. He didn't even get to say hello before a sharp, no-nonsense voice came through the other end. "Jason Whitmore, you are hereby dismissed from your position at Monroe Financial, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." His grip on the phone tightened. His face turned pale. This is a mistake," he tried to say. But the voice on the other end didn't waver. "You were caught on camera discriminating against a customer, against our CEO no less, while facilitating fraudulent transactions. There is no mistake." Jason's stomach dropped. He turned his head slightly, seeing a pair of security officers already making their way across the lobby toward him. He had lost. The bank, his career, was no longer in his hands. "Please, let me explain. Your personal belongings will be mailed to you. This conversation is over." The line clicked dead. Jason stood motionless for a long moment before finally turning back to the counter, looking at Rachel with wide, panicked eyes. But Rachel wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the security officers who had now reached the manager's desk. "Mr. Whitmore," one of them said, his tone firm, "you need to come with us." Jason swallowed hard. He cast one last look around the bank, at the customers still whispering, at the employees who were all carefully avoiding his gaze, at Rachel, who looked like she wanted to disappear. He had no choice. With his face burning in humiliation, he stepped back, raised his hands slightly, and allowed himself to be led away through the same doors where Ellie had exited just moments ago. The fall from power was swift, absolute, and irreversible. In the days that followed, Monroe Financial was turned inside out. Ellie wasted no time. Her first order of business, launching an immediate and full-scale investigation into the downtown branch. Financial auditors were sent in. Compliance officers reviewed every transaction. And just as she suspected, the corruption ran deeper than what she had witnessed. Jason hadn't been acting alone. Multiple fraudulent accounts were flagged. Illicit funds had been moved through the system under his watch, all disguised as high-profile client transactions. By the end of the week, several employees were either fired or placed under investigation. The entire branch was put under new leadership, and Ellie made one thing very clear. Monroe Financial would not tolerate corruption, not in any form, but her changes didn't stop there. Rachel Carter, despite her earlier actions, was not fired. Ellie made a different choice for her. She was suspended, but instead of being dismissed, she was required to undergo extensive retraining in both ethics and customer service. And if she failed to meet expectations after that, she wouldn't get another chance. Rachel hadn't been malicious. She had been complacent. And complacency in Ellie's eyes was just as dangerous. But everyone deserved one opportunity to change. Rachel would have to decide if she wanted to take it. After the scandal broke, Ellie didn't just fix one branch. She transformed the entire system. She implemented new policies designed to ensure fairness, transparency, and accountability. All branches would undergo regular and randomized audits. No more unchecked power for managers like Jason. Bias and ethics training became mandatory. Employees had to prove they could handle their roles with integrity. Any reports of discrimination or misconduct would be investigated immediately. No more looking the other way. A whistleblower protection program was introduced. If employees saw something wrong, they would have a way to report it without fear. And finally, perhaps the most personal policy Ellie enacted, secret evaluations would become a permanent practice. She would continue to visit her own branches, unannounced, just like she had that day. Because trust wasn't given, it was earned. And Monroe Financial would never allow itself to become a place where someone like Jason Whitmore could thrive again. Ellie hadn't walked into that bank expecting to uncover fraud and corruption. She had simply wanted to test the values she had built her company on. And what she found? It was a reminder. A reminder that power is not just about having control, it's about how you choose to use it. A reminder that injustice doesn't always announce itself loudly. It often lurks in the quiet decisions, in the unchecked authority, in the small moments when someone chooses to discriminate without consequence. That day, Ellie reclaimed control, not just over her own identity, not just over her own company, but over a broken system. And she fixed it. Not with anger, not with rage, but with decisive action and unwavering purpose. Because justice isn't just about exposing the wrong, it's about making things right. And that was exactly what she had done, for herself, for her company, and for every customer who would walk into Monroe Financial after her. Justice wasn't just served, it was redefined. Injustice happens in silence, until someone stands up and says, "Enough." Today, Eleanor Monroe didn't just reclaim her rights. She set a new standard for accountability, fairness, and leadership. What would you have done in her position? Have you ever witnessed or experienced unfair treatment like this? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you believe in standing up against injustice, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Because sometimes, the right story can inspire real change.